Yeah. So how long have you been raising the queens?
Oh, this would be our fifth season. Yeah. I mean, our first couple of years were really were quite unproductive. I'll put it that way. We were learning. Yeah, yeah. You make a lot of mistakes. You miss the day on the calendar. All those kind of basic mistakes.
Yeah.
Yeah, we made them all. Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The calendar is the most important, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah, you can't miss those days. Everything
Yeah.
has to be done
You get
precisely.
in your cell builder finisher. You get a queen hatching out early, and they wipe the whole 40 cells out. You have those kind of experiences that make
Yeah,
it.
that's
Yes. All
true.
right.
I have had that in the past, and these days I use an incubator to mitigate that.
Yes. Yes.
Yeah, that's there's a few reasons why I like to use an incubator, and that's one of them.
Yeah.
Because if you have queens hatch out in a cell builder, it's a nightmare.
It is. Yes.
Oh, it's
Because
a
then
that's
you
a
not
that's cell
only do
builder.
you lose all your cells, but then you've got to find her
Yeah,
and get rid of
well,
it.
I remember one year, this is going back a while now, I missed the day, it was sort of day 16 of the cells, and I thought, "All right, I can't go in today, but I have to go in tomorrow," type thing, and of course, they'd all hatched out, and I thought, "Oh,
Yeah.
maybe if I get in there before lunch, it'll be okay." Nah,
Mm.
they'd all hatched out, and it was just, they were all in there, and I
Mm.
found a lot of them dead on top of the queen excluder, but
Yes.
I counted the ones I found, and there were still 3 or 4 running around, and it took forever to find them.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was a real nightmare. So
Yeah.
now
That's right.
I
You're one day late, and it creates a week of work.
yeah. So these days I use an incubator, and that's one of the reasons why I do it. Just so if something happens around the day that the cells have to come out, that I know at least they're going to hatch into the cages in the incubator
Yes. Yeah.
as opposed to in the cell builder. Now, one thing I have done in the past a few times is I'll put the cages over the bars in the cell builder.
Yes.
Yeah, and I remember I did that once when my incubator broke, and that worked fine as well.
Yeah.
1 or 2 hatched into cages, and that was fine.
Mm.
So, that's something you can do. You can do the easy peasy cages straight on the
Yes. Yes.
JZBZ, cell
Yeah.
cups,
Under a
and that
cell.
works pretty well.
Mm.
Yeah,
Yeah.
there's other type of cell cups that, have cages, and they also work, so
Yeah.
it's
Like
pretty
the
efficient.
hair, the roller
Mhm.
cages. Yeah. Mm. Yeah. Yeah. Yes, we use an incubator now ourselves, but that early days we didn't. So there you
Yeah.
go. Mm.
Incubators are great because not only can you get them out of the cell builder and then you can, not have to worry about that last day, but it's also good because, especially in spring, there's quite a bit of wax that could form around the cells, and
Yes.
that's something incubators can stop that. And also, you can, if you want to let the queens hatch, you can cess them a bit easier.
Mm.
Yeah, it's really, really good. Plus, once they go in the incubator, they're all on the same pace after that because they're all getting the same temperature, as
Yes.
opposed to sometimes different parts of the cell bar can get different temperatures, and so
Yes.
that can affect the timings.
Mm.
So, and also one problem I used to have a lot, and actually happened to me once this season as well, is that the cells can get knocked down if you leave them in the cell builder too long.
Mm. Yeah.
So incubator is really good.
Yeah.
Now,
Right.
we've got some questions here from the listeners tonight.
Oh,
So,
yeah.
yeah, so we'll head to some questions now. So, just want to let listeners know, if you're listening to this, if you'd like to send in a question, if we've got the show notes here where you can go in, send a question in, and there's also a spot where you can record a question if you'd like to leave a voice message. So, we'll read one of these questions for you now, Phil.
All right.
How often should I inspect my hives during an active season?
Yeah. So active season in my mind is spring and summer. But I do need to say right up front that I think all beekeeping is local. That is, the beekeeper is dealing with their own experience and level of skills. They're dealing with their own local microclimate about what's flowering at the time. And of course, their own bees, which have characteristics and traits of maybe they're good honey producers or maybe they're very docile or something like that. But But generally speaking, I would go into my colonies probably once every 3 weeks. Um, Now, someone might go in to their inspect their colonies more often than that for swarm management reasons. So maybe every 10 days if they're looking to check for queen cells, swarm cells, for example. But I tend to go in there every 3 weeks. So I have other ways of managing swarms, the swarm season in my colony. So, but I need to say too that I'm working with 100 colonies, where someone who's listening may be working with one or whatever. So it does depend a little bit on that. All beekeeping is local statement. Hmm.
Yeah. Oh, legally, you have to do it twice a year here in Australia.
Yes.
At least
Hmm.
that's the law in Victoria, which is where I live, and I'm pretty sure it's similar in most other states.
Yes.
And but most people would go in a little bit more than that. But 3 weeks is pretty good. That's pretty often.
Yeah. Yeah. And look, it might not always be a full check of the colony. So I might just be going into the colony to check to see what honey's being brought in. So what food is available for the bees. Or I might just do a quick check to make sure the colony is queen right. So I'm looking for a frame that has eggs, which of course to me means the queen has been on that frame and 1 to 3 days ago, laying eggs. So a check for that the colony's still queen right. This season, currently, of course, South Australia is experiencing, well, the state government's just declared some drought assistance. So our resources that the bees are bringing in are quite limited. So unfortunately, I go present. We're nearly at the end of spring, but I go into a colony and I see frames that are fairly dry. So instead of being full of nectar and honey being put away, it feels like some of my colonies might actually kind of have plateaued or even going backwards a bit because of the local lack of floral resources because of very dry conditions. Mm. You mentioned that biosecurity arrangement where you have to inspect at least twice a year. Perhaps I should say too that there'd be some inspections, perhaps once a season, a change of spring or summer or autumn, where we would go through the brood box and we would closely examine the brood, looking for visual symptoms, particularly American foul brood. Um, and we would, with a matchstick, open up any suspect looking cells to yeah, so it'd get all the would shake the bees off and have a very close inspection of the actual brood itself.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. The string test. So if you see a cell that looks suspicious and a little matchstick in there, and if it strings out, then
Yeah,
you've got an AFB problem for sure.
yeah, a coffee colored kind of goo stringing out. Um, we also would probably a couple of times a year we would take a honey sample from all our hives and get that tested. So we'd send that off to Gribble's veterinary lab, and they would do an AFB test on that for us. Um, so we would probably do that a couple of times a year.
Mhm. All
Yeah.
right, next question.
Yep.
Um, what should I do if my hive is producing a supersedure cell?
Mm. Well, I mean that's good news, isn't it? Surely, it's the hive is taking the initiative. The queen is failing for some reason, maybe age or she's been damaged by the beekeeper in pulling frames out or something like that. But they're preparing to supersede or replace the existing queen with a new, young, vigorous queen, which is kind of the way a colony might renew itself. So um, I, I I used to. Knock off all the cells I saw when I was early days of beekeeping. And then I changed my approach and started, particularly supersedure cells, thought of them more as a resource. So I could pop a couple of frames into a nuke box and let those cells, let nature take its course, raise a new queen. If I liked that particular hive, that it was the characteristics of that hive that I liked. If it's a colony that I don't like, say for example the behavior of the bees, they're much more aggressive rather than docile. No, I'm not reproducing those genetics. That can stay put, that one. So yeah, I see them as yeah, more opportunity rather than, oh, I've got to do something. My colony is going to swarm on me, and all my bees are going to take off, and they'll be in the neighbour's tree. We when we have bees in our backyard, which is most of our bees are somewhere else, but um, our neighbour's tree means something to us. Uh, the lemon tree over the fence is where all our swarms always land,
That's
and
funny.
I have to humbly walk around to the neighbour and say, "Can I get my bees back?" Yes, the walk of shame that the bee
Yeah.
for the beekeeper.
Yeah. Well, we'll also just mention here that there's two types of swarm cell, or there's two types of queen cells that you'll see in hive. There's the
Yes.
supersedure cell and the swarm cell,
Mm,
and both of them are completely different situations.
yes.
So the supersedure cell is the ones that you're more likely to see in the middle of the frame
Hmm.
and tend to be in a weaker colony. And the swarm cells are the ones that you see on the bottoms of the frames. And so if you see swarm cells, then you know you're going to have to go into swarm management, and you probably should have already been doing it. And that is not a sign that your queen is no good. That's a sign that maybe she's too good and they have to be split. And
Yes.
supersedure, on the other hand, is more of a case that, okay, the queen in that colony isn't good and the colony realizes it. So one of them means bad queen and one of them means a really good queen.
Mm.
But
Yes.
they both look very similar. It's just that they're doing different places on the frame, generally speaking.
Yes. Yeah. So it's reading that frame, isn't it, really, which would,
Mhm.
for a beekeeper, just being able to identify that. And the clue, of course, is, as you described there, the place of the cells. Um, yeah. So certainly the supersedure cells, like, uh, are considered probably the best type of cell, if you like, to produce a new queen. Um, Rather than, say, you talk about swarm cells, or that emergency where for some reason the queen's failed relatively quickly, um, and the bees are just creating cells out of whatever resources are available.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Now, I don't know if it gets really hot where you are, but where I am, it's not the hottest place in Australia, but we'll have a go at answering this question. What can I do to help my bees survive in extreme heat in summer?
Mm. Yeah. Yes. Well, look, I'm based in Adelaide, and Adelaide is well known for having summer heat waves.
Oh,
And
really?
yes, yes. So we could, our worst case scenario is, you could have 3 or 4 days over 35 degrees and getting on to 40 and such. And I must say, we've actually probably lost more bees during a heat wave than we have, overwintering, for example. Um, but to survive extreme heat, I always think of full shade, having water for the bees, drinkable water for the bees, within 200 meters or so. Um, yeah, sometimes I've even tried to put an extra lid on for more insulation from the heat of the day for the bees. Um, yeah, so it's that the issue that I've come across is the internal temperature of the hive continues to rise. The bees don't have enough ventilation or water to cool themselves down with that evaporative cooling, and the strength of the wax starts to weaken. It doesn't melt, but it just weakens. It loses its strength, and then the big heavy honey frame kind of almost falls out of the frame, and honey starts running through the hive. That's the worst case scenario that I've come across. with our bees. So um, certainly, when the bees have been in the backyard and a hot afternoon, I've actually put the hose on the beehives, a bit of water on the actually on the hives. Um, and I did come across one guy who went off to work and he put the timer on for his sprinkler while he was at work. So yes, but certainly it's shade and water and anything to break the direct sun on the beehive, I think is a bonus.
Hmm. I
Yeah.
have had it once a long time ago that some of my bees ran out of water on a very hot day, and I
Mm,
did have one or two colonies that just completely melted out. It was devastating. So
mm.
I've always been super careful ever since then to make sure there's plenty of water. And one of the best things that I know for giving bees water is, have you ever seen those tiles that you sometimes see around pools? They're made out of rubber
Oh
and
yes,
they
yeah,
slot together like a puzzle.
yes, yeah.
Yeah, so you can get some that have holes in them.
Mm,
And so I buy those and you can just let them float on any type of body of water and the bees can land on top. And as the water level goes down, they can always still access the water. So
yeah,
they're really handy if you want to put those. I use them in IBCs, cut in half,
yeah,
but you can put them into any type of large barrel or even a bucket will do as long as it's big
yeah.
enough. Yeah, so
That's a
that's a
great
good way
idea.
of having. There's a great picture of me and a few friends. I think it was my first breeder queen that I ever bought, and
Right.
it was a expensive breeder queen.
Yes.
And I've got a bunch of wine barrels, half cut wine barrels around with these things in it, and a full gazebo over the hive. Just to be
Yeah.
careful. And
Well, it's getting the royal treatment there.
yeah, yeah, and it worked. It was good.
Yes,
Um, Another thing is painting your hives white. That's also, if they're going to be in the sun, that really helps as well.
it does. It's still the best reflective
Hmm.
color. Um, I know the temptation to pick up the cheap returned off tint paints at Bunnings, because they're half price, but they come in all sorts of different colors. But you can't beat a good coat of white paint
Hmm.
to help reduce the summer heat on a hive. Yeah.
All right, next question. How can you create and maintain a nucleus colony for
Yeah.
a nuke?
Yes. Look, I encourage anybody that's interested to always have a nuke on hand. From my way of thinking, it's like your insurance policy. You might have your flow hive, for example, which you want to produce honey out of, but your nuke is your backup. It's where you keep your spare queen. It's if the season turns against you, you can borrow some resources out of the nuke to keep your flow hive strong or something like that. So I think a nuke's really valuable in beekeeping. Um, so probably a couple of methods that we use. If I'm in a real hurry somewhere and I've got a colony that I need to split because it's overcrowded, it's vulnerable to swarming. I can do a walk away split. So that is taking some resources out of that colony with bees and putting it in a nuke box. Can let them raise their own queen, put in a mated caged queen or a cell that we may have raised. Um, but I find with walkaway splits, you can't control how many bees remain in the nuke because the tendency is to fly back home to the original colony. So I just kind of assume that about 50% of the bees that I put in for that walkaway split will go back. So that's if you have to do a split in the same location, really. Um, but when we're making up a number of nukes from a number of hives, we tend to pull out brood frames. All biosecurity things matters taken into consideration, but we would tend to pull out brood frames from anything that has more than 5 frames of brood. Those brood frames would be taken out and just placed at the side of the hive. And then, when we might have say, for example, 10 or 15 brood frames out, set aside. Then we'd go back and make up our 5-frame nucs out of that. So really combining bees and brood from a number of colonies to make up, maybe 10 nucs or something like that. So I have a little formula in my head all the time when we make nucs. It's usually 1 frame of food, which is honey or open nectar or pollen, 3 brood on 3 frames, and 1 frame comb or foundation if you haven't got comb for the bees to expand onto. So that's my little formula in my head. If you're leaving that 5-frame nuc to raise their own queen, of course you need to have eggs on one of the frames of brood. If you're going to put your own queen in there, a mated caged queen, then that's not as a pressing issue. But that's the kind of formula I have in my head to make up a nuc.
Mm-hmm. Phil and I were actually talking the other day, and we're talking about how sometimes I like to encourage people to, instead of getting a nuc, go and get a swarm.
Oh yes, yeah.
Because I think that I think it's a rite of passage to catch a swarm.
Good training ground because
Yeah,
what could go wrong?
yeah, that's true. Yeah, I quite often try to talk people out of buying a nuc and going and catching a swarm just because I think it's a fun memory to have in beekeeping.
Yeah.
I'll tell you a funny story, Phil.
All right.
There's a guy in Geelong, his name's John Edmonds, and he's a famous beekeeper here in Victoria.
I have heard of him.
Yeah, very, very good guy. And I think it was about sort of 12 years ago when I was just getting into beekeeping, and I was doing a lot of reading, and I remember I called him up and asked him if he had any nucs for sale.
Yeah.
And he's like, yeah, I've got a few of those.
I'm sure he took it well. Yes.
Yeah. He just
Yeah,
is
yeah.
like, oh yeah, I know what you mean.
It's a little clue of that, you're at the beginning of beekeeping.
Yeah.
When someone uses that term, they're right at the beginning, aren't
Yeah,
they?
because it's spelt, it doesn't look like the word nuke, the way it's spelt.
No, that's right. Yeah.
So
Yes.
I thought that was funny. All right, well, thanks a lot for coming on the show. Really
Yeah.
appreciate it.
I enjoyed the conversation and hope for a listener that they get something out of it. There's at least 1 or 2 things that might help them in their beekeeping journey.
Okay, well, I hope you enjoyed that episode with Phil. Really nice guy. And if you're over there in South Australia and you're looking to pick up a nuc or some queens, be sure to check out his business. It's called Adelaide Bee Sales. I'll put that in the show notes. Phil also does some really great work with the Australian Queen Bee Breeders Association. They've got a breeding program that they're establishing, so if you want to get involved with that, I'll put a link in the show notes. Hope everyone's going well at the moment. If you're here in Australia, you'd know that Varroa is on the move. I personally will get it very soon, I think. It's only 2 hours away from me, which here in Australia is quite close. So if you're a bit worried like I am, there's a call that I'll be doing with a friend of mine in New Zealand in a couple of weeks on the 18th of May, where we're going to be talking about Varroa treatments. So this is John Berry. He's the famous New Zealand beekeeper, 3rd generation, and does some great stuff. So he's going to be talking to me about Varroa treatments, and that'll be a live call, and I'll put a link to that in the show notes. You can also access it through the Keeping Bees Facebook group, which is the Facebook group for this podcast. You might also want to consider joining that just for any other future live calls or any, notifications for episodes, and it's really good for just being part of the community. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed that episode, and I'll catch you next time.